welcome in. This is the Round Pen, and I'm here with Clay Luna. He is a lay pastor with us at Thousand Hills Cowboy Church. He's also the team facilitator for our missions team, which is what we're going to be talking about today. And it's kind of cool. We were just talking right before we went on here that we're at camp. This is Hargis Retreat Center. This is Alabama Cowboy Camp 2023. Clay is here as a clinician.
Mm-hmm.
I have the honor of being here as a sponsor with our teenagers. We're down here, and we want to talk about missions and Clay's full-time gig. He works in the mission field full-time. So Clay, what is it that you do? Who is it that you work for?
So I do international missions as well as domestic missions. But I work for a company called Sunlight Power. They're out of Cincinnati, Ohio, actually in Milford. Been with them for 7 or 8 years now going on. It's pretty cool. When I got out of the Marine Corps, moved back to Tennessee. I worked as a teacher for a while, and then God moved me in a different location from that. And my wife, being the good helper that she is, she pretty much looked up Sunlight Power one day, and I told her I wanted to have a chance to give back and to use my electrical skills and my solar skills for other things than just work. You know, I wanted to have some way to give back, and I'd seen people like Carpenters for Christ and things like that, and wanted that ability. And so she Googled solar powered mission trips, and that was the first thing that came up with Sunlight, and called them. And within a couple of weeks, I was in Haiti on a trip, and been going almost once a month ever since.
So you can see he's repping the brand there down here, Sunlight Power on his hat. But like I said, Clay's a clinician down here, and I've known Clay. Me and Clay have served alongside each other pretty much since the time I started coming to Thousand Hills, not long after anyway.
Yep.
And, you know, that servant's heart is what we're called to do. And so where is it that we need to be serving?
Everywhere. So that's kind of how that's kind of the key phrase of our missions team at Thousand Hills Cowboy Church is here, near, and far. It's what the gospel tells us to do, and you don't have to go out internationally. Well, you don't have to travel on an airplane or have a passport to go out and do mission work. You can do it in our own backyard, and that's kind of like Boomer said. We were talking about that right beforehand, and that's actually a great key point. Is we're here with teens. I was here with preteens last week, and me and my wife and my family get a chance every year to have the ability to be able to serve in some capacity at church camp, and that's a serving field. Our youth are key. They're the future of the church. I mean, if you see a healthy church, absolutely. You know? If you see a healthy church, it's a church with kids, with young people, with families, with kids, and that's what you're really hoping for in a church. And so you don't have to actually go internationally or outside the state domestically. You can serve right here in our own backyard. And we need people to give water. I mean, there's people coming down here with students and helping with games or whatever it is. So that's that kind of here aspect of the mission. And then the near would be domestically. So we've got some stuff in the works right now that might happen with outside the state of Tennessee, maybe even inside the state of Tennessee. But we take some of our teenagers to pressure wash people's porches, you know, clean out gutters, mow yards. You know, we're called to serve the widows and the orphans, and if we can find an aspect of our church or somebody in our church that needs that, then we'll fill those gaps.
Yeah. Here, near, and far. Here being your local community,
absolutely,
and right around where you live. And we've had the opportunity from time to time to do that. We've had the opportunity to do it within our church. We've had the opportunity to do it within our community. And the near being domestic.
Yep.
And we've really had the opportunity to do that several times through disaster relief.
Oh, absolutely.
Through things of that nature. And I throw this out not as a bragging deal for our church.
No, not at all.
I know there are several people that watch this podcast that don't go to our church. It gets shared and it gets put out and it goes around. But this is a challenge for all churches within America is if you're not moving. That's what
right.
Our theme is here at camp is to move. If you're not moving and you look around and you see your people in your church and they're sitting on Sunday mornings and they're sitting on Wednesday nights, but they're not actively serving in the community, you're stagnant.
That's right.
We can't be stagnant in the line of work that we are called to do. Whatever it is you're called to do by Christ or by God, however you want to phrase it, whatever it is that you are called to do, I promise you it's an action.
Absolutely. If you've been to our church once, twice, or seen, online, you'll almost always hear Pastor Nate or somebody at the church say, we are not saved to sit, we are saved to serve.
Saved to serve.
And that's a key point in being a Christian, is having that servant's heart. And again, we've got, and we're not bragging, but we got people at our church that are in wheelchairs. They'll come in, sweep the floor, and clean up trash. I mean, there is a way to serve no matter where you're at. And a lot of people hang their hats on that Matthew 28 verse about going out, making disciples and making them known. It doesn't stop there. There's 100 different scriptures about getting up and helping in your local community, helping with other people. There's always something to do.
Yeah, and by no means are we promoting a works-based faith.
No, absolutely not. No.
The book of James makes it very, very clear that, you show me your faith. I'd have to look it up.
Sure.
I just got tongue-tied. I actually quoted it last night in our church group. But essentially, it's I'll show you my faith by my works.
Absolutely, yeah. And I'm terrible at that sometimes, is where I really want to hang my hat on works, because I'm a worker. A lot of people at our church, and not a lot of churches maybe in the South are, where, it's that blue-collar mentality. It's we want to work. That's our hands dirty. That's kind of it. But having that faith is more important, and showing that through your works is kind of what it's talking about. And, I kind of hang my hat on Isaiah 6:8, where it says, "Here I am, Lord, send me." Yeah. So I want to be sent. I want the Lord to use me. Pastor Nate said before, I don't want to be buried in a nice suit and tie and a casket. I want to come in sideways. People are like, dude, that guy got used, and the Lord used him.
He was used up.
Exactly.
Yeah. And, with what we look at as far as missions go, people tend to think of, disaster relief. They tend to think of one of the big ones used to be World Changers. I hadn't heard much about it in a while, but World Changers, where you're going in and you're doing these things in impoverished communities. But think of missions this way: anything you are doing to further the kingdom of God falls under the field of mission.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, there's no end to where it starts or stops. It could be almost anything.
Yeah.
And the biggest part of it is doing it with that servant's heart. You're not looking for anything in return. You're not going out there to brag. You're not going out there to say, "Hey, look at us. Look at what we can do." And you talk about our local stuff and disaster relief. That's it. When something hits and somebody needs help, being there.
Talk to somebody in a disaster that has been through a disaster area, and see who the first people to show up were.
Yep.
It's not FEMA.
No, not usually. It's the local churches, it's the local people who, and most of them all faith-based. I mean, for that fact. I mean, just they're doing what they're called to do. This camp is such a perfect example of what we are called to do with that movement of, we sung a song last night called "I'll Go Anywhere." And the chorus was, "I'll go anywhere, I'll do anything, God, send me, I'll go where you want." And that's kind of what it is for us as Christians to have a mission mindset. Here I am, send me.
Yeah. And, we actually planned to do this podcast about 3 or 4 weeks from the time that it's being recorded and filmed.
Didn't work out that way.
It didn't work out that way.
Absolutely.
And I'm so thankful that we're getting to do it right here on this mission field, right here at this camp. And we are seeing a lot of things down here where people don't really know that that's what they're doing.
Nope. Absolutely. Yeah.
I'm not necessarily into missions. I don't know how effective it is. Yada, yada, yada. Well, you're living it.
That's it. Yeah, you're changing the life of somebody who, and the students are the same way. They don't know they need it.
Yeah.
And so a sponsor comes along and talks to a student and encourages them. And I heard it just a few minutes ago in one of our Wrangler trainings. Students asking questions that they didn't have answers to, and people who are not pastors who are just coming alongside them as Christians and saying, "Here's the answer. Here's where to find it." Doing that, and that's what we're called to do.
Yeah, and just to kind of touch on it and go a little deeper. What is it? What are some plans that maybe Sunlight has to expand on? I know y'all going to Haiti, South. I know you've been to Africa. Mm-hmm. What are some areas that y'all are looking into as far as growth and where you're going? Yeah,
absolutely. So that's the one cool thing about being teamed up with Sunlight and having kind of Thousand Hills come on board with some of those trips is my wife was bringing it up the other day. we've actually sent a team, I think the last 4 years with Thousand Hills to other places, mostly Honduras or Central America. But Sunlight serves around the world. I mean, we'll go anywhere that somebody needs. That's kind of our motto as well, is where somebody needs power. And Sunlight works on the aspect of solar power with spiritual light. So physical light with spiritual light, and we kind of combine those two together and use it as a talking point to get the gospel out there. But we serve a lot in Central America. I go about once a month, and so anybody with our church that wants to jump on a trip, it could be individuals, it could be just somebody saying, hey, I want to serve, I want to see what it's like. Come on, we'll take you anytime you want to go, and almost anywhere we go. We take groups as well, but we have some big projects coming up in Africa, West Africa, East Africa, some going on maybe even in South Africa. But it's such a God story on how missions and things work, to where we actually have a family in our church that's been coming for maybe a little over a year now, and they actually lived at a mission I just got back from in West Africa.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they lived out there for 2 years, knew the mission inside and out, and when I told them that we were actually planning on going out there and serving in that aspect, they were the first ones to sign up for it.
Oh,
so
cool.
It was cool. So yeah, absolutely. If somebody wants to go somewhere or do something, again, we have stuff local, so that's our near would be domestically within the United States borders, even Puerto Rico, and that's a really cool part. I didn't even think about that. So we actually have missions coming up pretty soon, actually one really soon, that's going to be in Puerto Rico. And so you don't have to have a passport. You hop on a plane, fly down there. We spend about a week at most of our mission fields. So it's going to be a short-term mission aspect. It's not going to be long-term. We're out there for years. Most of them are about a month, about a week, maybe 2 weeks tops. And anybody who wants to go, there's a little bit of paperwork involved. And then as long as you got a passport for some of the international stuff, you can come on.
And me and you have talked about this quite a bit. You know, I had a little bit of a saltiness about me when it come to short-term missions, because I feel like a lot of times, and when you look at traditional short-term missions, that it was hurting more than it was helping.
Absolutely.
In a lot of these countries, you're taken away from, in a lot of instances, you take away from the local economy that's down there, and you're taken away from the abilities of people that work down there. And you're also creating a culture that's just waiting for the Americans to show up to build them a house or to do whatever the case may be. And I know when we went to Guatemala on a short-term mission trip when I was much younger, in my teenage years, they would wait on the American doctors to show up to go to the doctor.
Because they didn't like the locals.
They didn't want to see the Guatemalan doctor because they had to pay for it. But I'll stay sick for 3 months with a toe that's rotten until the American doctor shows up, and I can go there for free.
That's right.
And so I had just this real saltiness about me when it came to short-term missions. But what I love about what the conversations that we have is there's basically two folds to what Sunlight's doing. You've got your crew may be split in half, where part of the crew is working on the solar power, and the other crew is maybe putting on a small vacation Bible school.
Absolutely.
Or, those types of things. So you're doing what you said. You're physically giving them power and light in a school building or a church building or whatever the case may be, but you're also showing them spiritual light. And so when me and you had that discussion, and like I said, I had just a little saltiness about me, you're like, well, this is what we're doing. And my brother's involved in a Haitian or Dominican Republic mission field as well. That's very similar. You know, they don't run an orphanage, but they kind of help and equip families to take care of kids so that the kids don't end up in an orphanage.
Absolutely. And that's one of the greatest things that I loved about Sunlight when I came on board. Again, God works in mysterious ways, more than we can ever imagine. But coming on board and seeing what Sunlight does is we kind of get a twofold aspect of our mission, to where we kind of hang our hat on some of our stuff in the Caribbean, to where we go down there where impoverished people may not have electricity, and they've kind of done some studies where it may be 150 years before they get electricity up in these mountains. And so when we get a chance to go up there to these schools and empower them with electrical, locals aren't going to do that. The government's not going to do
Right.
that. And so we're not taking away from somebody, you know, we're not going into Etheridge, Tennessee or Lawrenceburg, Tennessee or here in Alabama and putting in a solar system that a local company would not do. We're not taking away from that field. We're going places where people, even the locals, wouldn't go most of the time. And so when we do that, we're not only empowering them, we're bringing the gospel. Like you said, we're doing a VBS. We're talking about Christ, and it's so cool that we relate how the solar comes in with the physical light and the spiritual light and tie it all together. But that's a small portion of the mission, as well as our larger one where we equip the saints. There are people out there, kind of like your brother, who are out there on a daily basis living this life. And I was like you. I didn't know anything about missions and how that worked and what all that kind of comprised of. But when I got into it, I wasn't being prideful, but I was proud to be a missionary. I was proud to do what God was calling me to do. But I found out really quickly in that mission field that when you say short-term mission or I'm a missionary and I go for a week at a time, that other missionaries kind of like, don't say that. Don't use that. Because there was a lot of missionaries, quote unquote, back in the day. That's what they would do. 1 week at a time, they would go down and they were hurting more than they were helping.
Oh yeah, and I've heard horror stories where they would go into places and build houses and then tear them down just so the next group could come in and build more houses. I mean, it's just that is terrible. If that happened, I can't corroborate that. Whatever that word is. I can't validate that happened, but I've heard stories of that where they would build houses and then that group would leave, or they would build a building or whatever, and that group would leave and they tear it down so the next group could come in and do it again.
Yep.
And short-term missions kind of got a bad name in that, and especially internationally.
Yep. I've heard horror stories as well. I mean, there's a village in the Dominican Republic. They call it Shoe Village, and the kids came in, and if you get into missions at all and you do any studying or any kind of storytelling, you'll hear the Great White Hope. And that's Americans going out into the world and saying they're broadcasting Jesus, but hurting the environment as well. And then there's a lot of great books about it. But this shoe village was a bunch of kids and families, and the kids didn't have shoes. The local missionaries, 1 week missionaries, short-term missionaries, came in and they bought shoes. They saw the kids without shoes and they thought, oh my stars, these kids don't have shoes. They need shoes. So they went to the local stores, bought up all the shoes, brought them back to the village, gave the shoes to the kids, and kids were thankful and they left. Well, next week, another mission team comes in. There's no shoes in the village. They've hit all the shoes. So now they just keep getting, and that was a thing for a while, is all these kids had this pile of shoes and then they went out and sold them. Yeah. And so you're not helping the economy there when you do something like that.
Right. And, David Platt, I did his study, Something Needs to Change, I believe is the name of it. And he talked about being in the Himalayan mountains and walking through and seeing them without water and stuff like that, and him going, they have to have water. And so he gives this little girl a bottle of water, and he said her face just lit up, and he was like, I just did something. I gave this girl a bottle of water, and she takes the top off of it, dumps the water out of it, and then the water bottle becomes a toy. We think going in like we are the all-knowing and we are here to educate you on how you should be living your life, because you live in a third world country, we live in a first world country.
Absolutely.
I can go to Tractor Supply and buy me a new pair of blue jeans, pretty much anytime I want to, and you can't do that. So let me educate you but no, they don't know they're poor.
Absolutely not. No, they're so happy with what they have. And I tell anybody I talk to about missions at all, that's one of the first things I ever tell them is when you get there into the community, it's not like you see on TV with the sad faces and the kids and people out there helping. These people are already so happy, and they're happy that you're there to help. But that's one of the reasons I like the way Sunlight kind of handles it is when we're out there, we're working with locals. So the locals are involved. They're more involved than we are in some cases, and they know what needs to be done. So we kind of come alongside them. But when you're there, these people are so happy and content with what they have. They want to share what they have with you and not the opposite way around. But then when you come in and you start saying, hey, I'm here to do this and this for you, you find out really quick, and almost every missionary that I've ever took has came back and said, those people have more faith than I'll ever have. Or they've got, it's not like you're taking Jesus to them. Jesus is there. Jesus is everywhere. It's not that you're just the one white person that took Jesus to another place. And so when you get there, they're like, oh yeah, here's the scriptures that we love, or here's this, and Jesus is already doing this. And so you find out really quick that your faith isn't where you thought it was going out there on that trip.
And a lot of times people, you hear this from people that have gone on short-term missions. I went to help them, but I came back with so much more. Every single time. And, but you should have that mindset of, I'm going to share the gospel. And I've heard Nathan say this before, that some of the most powerful things that he remembers out of mission work is equipping the saints.
Yes.
Equipping somebody to pastor a church or to facilitate a Bible study or whatever the case may be in that instance. And so, man, I have been excited about missions. I've been excited about doing this podcast. I am glad that it didn't work out a couple of weeks ago when we got to end up here. Did we hit all the points? You were typing them down.
Yeah, I think so. That was the biggest thing. Some of the stuff that we got coming up with trips as far as local and stuff. I mean, if anybody's interested, they can find me, my wife, anybody else who is on the missions team and talk to us about it. Like I said, we've got some stuff that's local, and I can't talk into it a lot because none of it's finalized, but there's some stuff that I'm super, like, I'm giddy as a schoolgirl about some of the stuff that's coming up, and would love to talk to anybody about it. And it relates to our church. It's so cool how God has taken the Cowboy church mentality and the mission field mentality and literally just ran them together. And how cool it's going to be with some of the stuff coming up. And then overseas, it is a awesome blessing to take a bunch of redneck cowboys to another place and see how they react. And almost every time it's kind of like camp. You get out of your comfort zone and you become another person. And it's amazing to see what God does in their lives. Yeah.
And for those of you that don't go to our church, I do want to encourage you, because when 2013, 2014, me and you having conversations about mission work, and it's like, man, it's really hard to get people on fire about mission work. They're real scared about it.
Absolutely.
They're real nervous about it back then, and where we've come to now. But I tell you one thing that our church started with, and this may not be for your church, but it's just an example of a way that you can start missions in your church without having to jump on an airplane and go. And that's something like the Christmas boxes.
Oh, absolutely. Christmas shoe boxes.
The Christmas shoe boxes, the Thanksgiving meals for your community. Those types of things are great ministries and great missions that don't require you to leave your church house.
Absolutely.
And it's a way to spark interest in mission work.
It is. And you bring up a good point, and not to make this go longer than it needs to, but if you are in that position, if you're interested in starting up missions, I was the same way. We are nowhere close to where I think I would want to be as a missionary leader for our church. But I know exactly where God wants us to be because of the ways that things are happening. But I've seen and grown so much from what God has showed us. And you brought up the Thanksgiving turkeys and things like that. Going to another community around the world and coming in and being that great white hope is easily to do here at home too. Yeah. It's hard for somebody to wrap their mind around. I want to give somebody a turkey and a Thanksgiving dinner who don't have that, but doing it in a way that doesn't hurt. And our church found that out, not necessarily the hard way, but we were instructed and led in a really good way by some other people who'd done mission work before, where when you go out into your own community, and it doesn't have to be a Thanksgiving dinner, but when you do that, make sure you're doing it in the right way to where you're not standing out there and having those families come to you and say, hey, I need this. Yeah. Do it in a way where you're empowering that family. I know one of the things that we talked about before in some of our trips or some of our local missions is, you may have a dad out there who feels terrible he can't provide for his family, but the wife went and drove to the local church and picked up a food box and brought it home and they get a turkey dinner. Well, that's great, but now you just cut the legs out from under that dad. And as a Cowboy church, our main goal is the fathers, the dads, building them up, and then that way the rest of the family comes to know God.
In turn, you talk about God's order in that.
Absolutely,
that's a podcast for us.
So like I said, I don't want to drag it on, but just reach out to somebody who has prior knowledge in that. Yeah. And again, we were blessed that we didn't go down that road the wrong way and make a fool of ourselves or what we were doing. And so just kind of keep that in mind. If you're ever interested or need more knowledge about, hey, how's the best way to handle this, how do we do that, reach out to us or somebody else that that's in missions and have them explain it to you.
Yeah. And a lot of you may be watching this on Facebook or you may be listening to it on a podcast platform, whatever the case may be. But just if you have questions about it, shoot Thousand Hills Cowboy Church a message.
Absolutely.
Get in contact with our office. And they can get you in touch with Clay. Clay can get back in touch with you. See if we can, help others, because that is our goal.
Absolutely.
It's not us four and no more.
Oh, no. I would love to see every church out there in America do. I mean, you hear that all the time, but can you imagine if the church actually stood up and done what was called to do? It would be a radical different nation.
Yeah.
I mean, as another podcast.
It is. And I will encourage you, go back and look at the first podcast that me and Nathan did.
Yep.
Where we talked about the beginnings of Papyrus Ministry and the decision, the Roe v. Wade decision being overturned and those types of things, and see where the church has just sat.
Oh, absolutely.
And that Papyrus Project conversation happened right here on this ground.
That's right.
At camp last year, and we're still in that thing is still growing and moving. We're not where we want to be.
No.
But it's I still, thank goodness, in our local community, there are a lot of churches that are stepping up and helping in that area, but you still see a lot of churches that are just stagnant.
Absolutely, yeah.
When there is a big need for that area.
Oh, yeah.
And gonna continue to get bigger.
Yep, everybody's backyard. If you get into even local ministry, it can break your heart what's out there. You think that I got to go overseas to see some of this stuff. It's in your backyard. I promise you, 100%.
Yeah, and we see it here. We don't have a clue there's 316 campers here. We don't have a clue what some of these kids have gone through.
The stories that come out of camp sometimes will break your heart.
It will.
Yeah.
It will.
Yeah. And that's, again, leading back to, if you're here and you're helping in that capacity, you're quote unquote a mission. I mean, you're doing what you're called to do.
Yep.
Serving. So.
Well, Clay, I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
I have had a good time having a conversation with you and talking about missions, and I appreciate you taking your time. It is hot.
It's hot, dude. It's hot.
So hot.
Try not to sweat.
Actual temperature today, 100 degrees. So if you don't care, Clay, I'm going to ask you to pray.
Absolutely.
And we'll wrap this up.
Yeah, sure. God, thank you so much for this day, Lord. Thank you for the heat. Lets us know that we're alive, just like the cold does, God. But thank you for that servant's heart. God, thank you for the ones that you put in place that are able to fill those shoes and fill those gaps. Lord, we talk about it as a Cowboy Church a lot, filling those gaps and fences. Lord, thank you for doing that in our lives. Thank you for sending Jesus to die on a cross, Lord, that we can see that ultimate servant's heart. He came to this earth in human flesh. He laid down his life when he didn't have to. It was his to give, nobody else's. And God, he was able to pick it back up. God, thank you so much for the ability to be able to do that in our local community, Lord, with sunlight, with here, near, and far, Lord, that we just we get out of the way and we let you do what you do best, and that's show out and show off for you and yourself and not for us, God. I pray that you allow us to be able to reach, Lord, the masses, millions. God, I pray big for this message to go out and talk to others and show others, Lord, that we are all saved to serve and not saved to sit. We pray all this in your glorious Son's name. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, buddy.
Clay.
Yep.